chat. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Clio Institute's Earth Day 2021 webinar series, day 2. We're really happy to have students and teachers all around Florida and outside of Florida probably joining us today. I'd love to welcome those of you who are joining virtually from your homes and those of you who are watching from your classrooms. Hello. If you haven't already, feel free to drop your name, school, and where you're joining us in the chat. So today is the second day of our Earth Day 2021 webinar series, where today's theme is climate justice. So we're going to talk a little bit about the intersection between the climate crisis and social and racial justice. For those of you who joined us yesterday, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sure you'll enjoy today as well. Next slide, please. So we're thrilled to have you here. My name is Gabriela Rodriguez, and I'm a program coordinator at Clio, and I will be hosting today's event alongside my colleague, Julieta Rodrigo, who is our program manager. The Clio Institute, if you don't know, it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to increasing and driving climate change literacy, education, and advocacy here across the state of Florida. So we're actually going to watch a quick video now to give you all a better idea of who we are and what we do.
I want you to ask yourselves those tough questions, the ones we avoid, how we want to live, what do we want for our children, what do we want for our planet?
Our atmosphere is so finely tuned for what we need, and we're treating it like a dumping ground, a sewer. The health impact of climate change is a global problem, and we see the results of that on a local level.
If we fail to act now, then we will leave behind a fundamentally degraded planet for our children and grandchildren, a planet that resembles the futures that have been portrayed in dystopian Hollywood films, unprecedented inundation of our coastlines, droughts, floods, heat waves, superstorms. That's the future that we will see if we fail to act on climate.
The Clio Institute was founded in 2010 with the drive to educate and empower South Floridians to act on climate. Founded by Caroline Lewis, a science teacher by training, her vocation led her to understand what was causing people's apathy towards the glooming climate crisis: knowledge.
We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction.
Today, the Clio Institute is the #1 nonprofit organization for climate education, engagement, and advocacy. Through programs like the Clio Speakers Network, Clio trains people to become climate speakers by breaking down the science, impacts, and solutions. Clio's educational efforts are backed by a world-class expert advisory council of scientists, environmentalists, teachers, and government officials. While the world is already feeling the impacts of our changing climate, not everyone is feeling it the same way. Clio is a leader in the climate justice movement, providing the resources and tools to the most vulnerable communities in South Florida that are on the front lines of the climate crisis.
I wanted to be an outreach for them.
Building communities' resilience through women is the cornerstone of our Empowering Resilient Women program. By teaming up with community members like the YWCA, Clio is able to empower and educate women on how better to prepare for more extreme weather events like hurricanes while building community. Clio works to remove barriers and build a wider coalition to fight climate change across faith-based communities, elected officials, and municipalities, schools, and cultural organizations. One of the most important voices that Clio continues to amplify is that of our youth.
What do we want? When do we want it?
Their Gen Clio program meets regularly with students across the region, training them to be climate ambassadors in their schools and communities.
Dear elected officials,
this is a crisis. Do your job. We'll be watching.
Clio recently launched its Climate Resilient Schools initiative to bring their program into the classrooms while building a robust climate curriculum for Miami-Dade public schools. Clio continues to expand its engagement through multimedia outreach, including television commercials, social media, and billboards. With statewide campaigns like the Florida Climate Pledge,
I care about climate change. And I care about climate change because it affects everybody regardless of race, culture, and ethnicity. because I'm passionate about the success of my future.
I like the Clio Institute because it takes the time to educate people about the importance of climate change and the things that we can do to improve our world.
You can have your voice heard too. Fund our climate action work today. The future of Florida is in your hands.
I want you to ask.
All right. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Clio and what we do. So what are we doing today? Well, we're going to start off first with a climate presentation that's titled Superheroes Among Us, where we're going to go over the science, the impacts, and the solutions to climate change, with an extra focus today on climate justice. After that, we're going to hear from one of our amazing Clio Clip students, Gianna Hudden. She's a student who's heavily involved with our work here at Clio, and she's going to tell you a little bit about what she does. And then after that, we're going to go into our first activity, that is our climate conversations. We're going to start conversations with a loved one. And then after we have a quick break, we'll jump back into our activities with another one that is our action alert. So we're actually going to take tangible action today for climate on this call. And then lastly, we'll let you know how to get involved and how to continue the conversation with us here at Clio. Please note that on this event, we don't have any dedicated Q&A sessions. So if you have any questions, just feel free to drop them in the Q&A box that you see on your screen, and we'll make sure to have a Clio staff member answer them and type back to you on the call. So now that all this housekeeping is done, I'm really happy to start today's event, and I'd like to kick it off to Julieta, who's going to give you a great interactive Climate 101. Take it away, Juli.
Thanks, Gabby. Hi, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of our webinar series. My name is Julieta, as Gabby mentioned. I'm a program manager here at the Clio Institute. And today our presentation is going to be about climate science, impacts, and solutions. Before we get started on that, I'd like to share with you a little bit about myself and what drives my journey and my climate activism, because later on you'll be thinking about what drives your climate activism. So my climate story begins in Argentina. That's where I was born and raised, and particularly I lived in a coastal town called Mar del Plata, which is surrounded by biodiversity. Particularly, I had a fascination with sea lions when I was younger. So this picture right here is from around like 1998, and I have my sister and my grandma accompany me in front of a statue of sea lions. And being surrounded by biodiversity allowed my love for the ocean to grow. And much of my climate activism today is inspired by my journey in Argentina. When my family emigrated to Miami, where I currently live, we also lived in a coastal town. And much of that inspiration from my childhood has continued to spur my climate activism. So my sister and I actually went back to Argentina when we were older to see how this inspiration has changed both of our lives. My sister is also into marine biology. So today's Superheroes Among Us, and we do this great work with the help of our supporting partners, and we give climate presentations all over and beyond, reaching wide audiences. So let's begin by asking ourselves, who is a superhero? And when you ask someone that, they usually give you 2 kinds of answers. The first kind is the superhero comic book characters, things like Superman, the Incredible Hulk, and Spider-Man. And as a result of the corona pandemic, we've also been seeing new answers. People like our medical workers are considered superheroes, as are our first responders, our truck drivers, and even our grocery store employees. And at the Clio Institute, I'm very fortunate to work with an emerging class of superheroes, and that's our youth. Our youth have been at the forefront of the climate movement, and they've been using their voice and taking to the streets to hold climate elected officials accountable for climate action as well as climate inaction. These are pictures from 2019 from the Global Youth Climate Strike. And during that strike, about 6 to 7 million people throughout 150 countries participated in this event. The picture in the top right-hand corner of your screen is a strike that Clio held in collaboration with other organizations here in South Florida. This one was particularly outside of Miami Beach, where we wanted the city of Miami Beach to declare a climate emergency, and public pressure actually got that to happen. And so why did students around the world go on strike? And that we had to start at the and that comes into vocabulary. So we have to define weather versus climate in order to understand what the climate crisis is all about. So weather refers to the conditions of the atmosphere over a short period of time. Weather can change within minutes or hours. So for instance, in 1 hour, it can rain, and the next hour it can be sunny. That's weather. Climate, on the other hand, refers to how the atmosphere behaves over a long period of time and space. It's typically measured over decades, can also reach centuries and even longer. So when you're talking about normal average temperatures for a region, or when you're referring to Florida as a tropical climate or a subtropical climate, that's what we mean when we talk about long-term climate trends. And so climate scientists have been analyzing what's been happening with our climate recently, as well as what are the human contributors to changes that we're seeing. And so we have to also understand what the greenhouse gas effect is. This is regulated on our planet, and it works as follows. So here we have the sun releasing energy, mostly in the form of sunlight. This sunlight passes through the atmosphere, and once it hits through the atmosphere, it can do two things. If it hits land or ocean, it gets absorbed. And if it hits white space, like our ice caps, it gets reflected back into space. As this energy is reflected, the wave changes and it becomes heat or infrared waves. And as these waves try to exit and go back into outer space, they get stopped by a layer around the Earth called our atmosphere. This atmosphere contains gases called greenhouse gases that help keep our planet warm. The main purpose of greenhouse gases is to trap heat. Now, normally the greenhouse gas effect is a good thing because it keeps our planet warm. And if we didn't have the greenhouse gas effect, we would be living on a frozen tundra. But what we do want to emphasize is that the greenhouse gas effect has been intensifying. It's becoming more strong, and it's making our planet warmer. And this is the direct result of human activity, which we'll explore in this presentation. And so have you ever heard somebody say that they're not sure that the climate crisis is even a concern because the climate has always changed and will continue to change regardless of what humans do? And we hear this a lot at Clio. And so we like to include this slide to indicate why that's not necessarily accurate. So this chart measures carbon dioxide in our atmosphere for the last 800,000 years. And as you can see, over this time period, carbon dioxide fluctuated, going up and down over this time period. The periods of warmth, because we know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and greenhouse gases trap heat. So when we have more CO2, we have warmer temperatures. And these low points indicate periods of relative cold, like ice ages. So for 800,000 years, the atmospheric carbon dioxide was undergoing a pattern, but it never passed this line, which was 300 million. Around the 1800s and 1900s, humans started producing and consuming much more rapidly and at much greater levels. This is something that we call the Industrial Revolution. And in the 1950s, we crossed this threshold of 300 parts per million. And the CO2 in our atmosphere has been increasing since. We're currently here as of March 2021, where we're at 416 parts per million. So this chart teaches us two things. One, yes, the climate has always changed naturally and will continue to change naturally. This is caused by things like volcanic eruptions, changes in the Earth's orbit and tilt, and other factors. But what we are seeing in this part of the graph is directly contributed to human activity. So we can't exactly say that we're in a natural climate change cycle anymore. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to play a game. This is called Two Truths and a Lie. Two of these statements that you see on your screen are true, and one of them is the lie. So I'm going to read them aloud to you and ask you to put in the chat which one you think is the lie. So number one, weather refers to short-term trends while climate refers to long-term trends. Number two, the greenhouse gas effect is weakening. And number three, Earth's climate has always changed and will continue to change regardless of human activities. So I'll give you all about 10 seconds to put your answers in the chat. All right, I am seeing a large consensus that greenhouse gas effect is not weakening, it is intensifying, it is becoming stronger, and that's why our planet is becoming warmer. So everything is connected to the climate crisis. And as we start to explore the impacts that this changing climate is having on our planet, we are going to see how everything is connected to this. So everything that you care about, and we're going to put that to the test. Actually, you're all going to put me to the test. So I want you to put in the chat something that you care about, and I'm going to try to connect it to the climate crisis. And we're going to see just how many things are connected to climate change. So I'll give you all about 15 seconds. You can put any sector of society, sports, people, places. All right, so I am seeing some answers trickling in, so thanks so much for your participation. So I'm gonna extrapolate a couple. Something I care about is soccer. So soccer and outdoor sports are definitely gonna be impacted by a changing climate. We're gonna see in today's presentation about extreme heat and the impact that that has on athletes, particularly student athletes. Somebody also mentioned forests, and yes, forests are being cut down to make room for agriculture as well as cities to the climate crisis. So these are great answers. I wish we had time to explore all of them. Let's go into the presentation and see if you can make the connections between what you care about and the climate. So when we talk about what's happening on our land, we are to our land in ways that benefit or harm our environment. So our land is very important in the climate crisis because trees and soil absorb carbon from the atmosphere. So they help protect us from a changing climate. Unfortunately, about a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions come from us using land in inefficient or unhealthy ways. Now, this refers to agriculture, forestry, and even cutting down trees to make room for cities. And the tree cutting process is actually doubly harmful because we know that trees absorb carbon. So that's a bad sign. When we cut down so many trees, we reduce their ability to absorb carbon. But then trees also release the carbon that they've been storing when we cut them down, further contributing to global warming. And throughout the world, the production of beef is the leading cause of tropical deforestation. And conventional agriculture emits a lot of methane. Methane is another greenhouse gas that contributes to the climate crisis. And on a warming planet, our oceans are also warming. Oceans have absorbed about 93% of excess heat. And this is causing a decline in oxygen concentration, making our oceans more acidic. They are absorbing more than a quarter of the carbon dioxide that we're releasing into the atmosphere. Now, both of these impacts have tremendous consequences on our biodiversity. For instance, our coral reefs are being decimated throughout the world. They get stressed with warm temperatures and they die. We're also seeing the rise of things like algal blooms or red tide, and that affects biodiversity because it creates toxic conditions for marine life. A warming planet also exacerbates extreme weather. Particularly in Florida, we are very vulnerable to hurricanes. A warming ocean results in stronger and larger hurricanes that bring more rain, more storm surge, they move more slowly, and they intensify faster. So the result of that is more deadly. We do see on the right of your screen a chart of Hurricane Michael's trajectory. And when it started, it was a relatively weak storm. But as it hit the Gulf of Mexico, which was 5 degrees warmer than average, this warmer water allowed the storm to grow about 70% in just under 33 hours. So that when it hit landfall, it was the 3rd largest storm to ever hit the continental United States. And just hurricanes that create devastating damages. In Houston, we had Hurricane Harvey. We also had Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. And then lastly, we're also seeing forest fires being exacerbated. So in Florida, more than 5 million people live in areas that are at elevated risk of wildfire. So we have more than 1/4 of our population at elevated risks. And we know that on a warming planet, trees are more likely to catch fire and to stay burning for longer periods of time. Sea level rise is also something that we are very vulnerable to, particularly in South Florida. Sea level rise is caused by 2 things. One is thermal expansion. We already mentioned that the oceans are absorbing heat. Now, thermal expansion refers to the way that water expands when it's heated. So warm water takes up more space than colder water. And the second reason for sea level rise is land ice melting. On a warming planet, we know that our ice caps are melting. And when they melt, they go into the ocean and they contribute to sea level rise. So when you combine these 2 things, you see devastating consequences. Scientists are predicting 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050. And by 2100, about 8 to 10 feet are a possibility. So for those of you who live in South Florida, this is what Miami-Dade County looks like today. And this is what it would look in 8 feet of sea level rise. And this area in particular is something that I want to point out. This area that's not submerged in sea level rise projections, it's what's called our coral ridge. And this is an area of higher ground in South Florida. So in sea level rise projections, this is a very valuable area for real estate. What we do want to note here is that this area is home to our low wealth communities that are predominantly minority communities. So when we see the rest of South Florida being impacted by sea level rise, we are going to see an increased pressure to move into this higher ground, and that could displace the people that already live here. And if you're not in South Florida, do not think you will be unaffected by sea level rise. Everything in this blue area that's submerged is what's going to be impacted if 8 to 10 feet of sea level rise becomes a reality. Now, this is particularly harmful as well for our indigenous populations. Particularly in South Florida, we have indigenous populations living in our national parks like Big Cypress. And we are also concerned about the rise of climate migrants. Now, when we have sea level rise, people that live in these areas in the coasts are going to move inland and upward. And so our cities to the north have to be prepared for a rise in climate migrants. Saltwater intrusion is also a threat in a warming planet. When we see sea level rise, that's going to affect our access to fresh and clean drinking water. Now, Florida is unique in the way that we don't get our drinking water from things like lakes or rivers. Most of Florida gets its drinking water from under the ground through things like aquifers. And these aquifers are surrounded by a porous rock called limestone. So you can see it looks sort of like a sponge. Now, this is very good for filtering water, but it also makes us very vulnerable to sea level rise. As our sea levels start to rise, we are seeing more salt enter our drinking water supply, and that's threatening our access to fresh and potable water. Now, we do have solutions and technologies to take out this salt from our drinking water. but this is a very expensive solution that's likely going to increase the price of fresh water. And think about how that's going to impact people disproportionately, particularly our low wealth communities. So we're going to play the same game. We're going to play 2 truths and a lie again. If you can put in the chat which one of these statements you think is the lie, I'll read them aloud. Number 1, sea level rise will only affect people living on Florida's coastlines. Number 2, warming will lead to stronger hurricanes. And number 3, our drinking water may become more expensive due to saltwater intrusion. Okay, there seems to be a huge number 1 is definitely the lie. Sea level rise will not only affect people living on the coastlines. These are consequences that could percolate throughout the entire state and throughout the whole country, because there are many other states that are vulnerable to sea level rise as well. Good job, everybody. Let's continue with impacts. In Florida, we're also very vulnerable to heat. Extreme heat is projected to get worse as a result of the climate crisis. Extreme heat impacts our health. And for those of you on the line that are student athletes, heat-related illnesses are the leading cause of death or disability among high school athletes. So this is something that we have to be super careful about. On the top right of your screen, you see charts indicating danger days. This is when the heat index would be above 105 degrees. Now this measures heat and humidity, which is basically how does it feel like to be outside? And this is lethal if you are outside for very long periods of time. By 2030, scientists are predicting about a third of the year in temperatures or heat indexes above 105 in Miami. And Miami's not alone. We have Orlando and Tampa also at risk. And think about as well all of the people who live outside and work outside, my apologies. Our agricultural workers and our construction workers are also at risk. And this also becomes a social justice issue. When we talk about extreme heat being a social justice issue, we have to think about who is this impacted. So if you take a look at this picture, this is a picture of a bus stop in Miami-Dade County. And I'd like for you to just take a few seconds and think about what's wrong with this picture. Well, what's wrong with it is that there's no shade, right? And unfortunately, in Miami-Dade County, there are lots of bus stops that look like this, where people are exposed to long periods of time under very, very hot days. Marginalized communities are also feeling the heat through their housing, utility bills, and transportation. So we just talked about transportation, but as far as housing and utility bills go, think about the increased stress that extreme heat brings on utility costs and how that could impact families that are already financially vulnerable. There is no climate justice without social justice. If you see the chart on the right, you see that Latinx Americans are exposed to 63% more pollution than they produce. And Black Americans are exposed to 56% more pollution, while non-Hispanic white Americans are exposed to 17% less pollution than they produce. So this is definitely a social justice issue, and it's a matter of equity. All right. So here we have another aspect of equity. We have climate and food. Underserved communities are projected to receive the hardest impacts. One of those ways is through the prices of food. By 2030, scientists are predicting that 9 out of the 10 major crops are going to experience reduced or stagnant growth rates. And we know that when we have less supply, prices go up. Corn, rice, wheat, and other crops are expected to almost double in price. This is by 2030, which is only 9 years away. Food insecurity affects every other country as well. So we have climate refugees coming from other parts of the world as a result of food insecurity triggered by the climate crisis. So floods, droughts, landslides, sea level rise, and tropical storms are affecting food supplies all over the world. If you remember a few years ago, we had the climate caravans from where migrants from Central America were trying to emigrate into the United States. This was largely triggered through food insecurity. And now this is not to say any anti-migrant sentiment, it's to state that the United States has to be prepared in its infrastructure to account for an increased demand for space and land and resources. And all of these feelings, all of these consequences that we're seeing, these threats in the climate crisis, may bring up feelings of eco-anxiety or depression, particularly in our youth. And we do want to take a moment to recognize that you are not alone, that we see this often, and that there are solutions. One of those solutions is to channel these emotions into engagement and to join a bigger movement to become part of the change. At Clio, we talk about something called the 3.5% rule for social change. And what this refers to is that there was a study by academics to analyze the social justice movements of the last few centuries, things like the Vietnam War protests or the racial justice protests during the civil rights movement. What they realized was that you don't need 100% of the population to ensure serious political change. You only need 3.5%. And so that's a much more doable number. And that's what gives us hope. So we're going to take a pause before we get into our solutions. And I'm going to ask you, if you were president for one day and I gave you $5 billion, had to spend it all, which of these following issues would you tackle and why? So I'm going to give you all about 20 seconds to put it in the chat. We have sea level rise, ocean acidification, health, biodiversity, social justice, land use. So pick one and let me know which one you think is most important to tackle. I see many of you are focusing on what's happening with our water, right? In terms of sea level rise or ice melt. Saltwater intrusion, I'm also seeing. Absolutely. So again, these are all priorities and there's really no right answer. We do want to emphasize that we have to address them all. So as we start going into climate action and what climate solutions are out there, we do want to emphasize that climate action benefits everybody. From access to greener jobs, more livable cities, healthier water, air, and environments for ourselves and for future generations, climate action is a good thing to bring about. So let's talk about solutions and what are some of these solutions out there. The solutions are in a few different categories. One is mitigation, which has the root word mitigate, which means reduce. Now, mitigation refers to reducing heat trapping gases. So anytime we burn fossil fuels, for instance, we release greenhouse gases that trap heat. So one example of mitigation is to energy so that we release less greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Another solution is called adaptation, where we adapt to the effects of the climate crisis. So while we are working on long-term trends, we also have to focus on adaptation because we are seeing today effects of a changing climate on the people and environment that we see around us. One example of adaptation is living shorelines. And these are living ecosystems, natural ecosystems that we can use to protect our coastlines from rising sea levels. We also have restoration and regeneration, which focuses on improving the health of ecosystems. We know that trees and soil and healthy environments absorb carbon, and restoring things like coastal wetlands or ensuring that our farmlands are diverse and they rotate crops helps these ecosystems to be healthier and absorb more carbon from the environment. And so why does this matter, particularly in the United States? Well, one of the reasons is that the United States is one of the main contributors to the climate crisis. On this chart on the left, you can see that the United States is number 2 in contributions of total greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And if you look at it per person on a per capita basis, the average American citizen produces more pollution than a citizen of any other country in the world. Now, this is not to say the United States is the only one that needs to act, but that we have to act on this in a collaboration with all of the other countries in the world. One of the ways that we've been doing that is through something called the Paris Accord, which was a collaborative effort signed in 2015 among 189 countries. And the main goal is to limit global temperature increases to 1 degree Celsius by 2050. We also have within the United States something called the Green New Deal, and it's going to be reintroduced to Congress this week. Its main goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions within the United States while also trying to fix societal problems like economic inequality and racial injustice. So let's talk about some solutions that we can incorporate on an individual level as well as on a societal level. Plant-based meals are a great solution to the climate crisis because we know that the more plants that we consume, the lower our carbon footprints. We also know that reducing food waste is a solution. If food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. When food waste hits landfills, it releases methane, which, as I mentioned, is a greenhouse gas that traps heat. So reducing food waste is a great solution. Composting is also good. If you haven't heard of composting before, it's where you take food waste and you break it down in a healthy environment, and it produces something that we can use as fertilizer to nourish our soils and grow more food. So it's more of a circular economy. And we have to think about systemic changes. How can we make sure that our farmlands are operating at a healthier level? How can we increase access to composting, for instance, on a municipal level or county-wide level so that more people have access to this? And consumption and production is also responsible for the climate crisis. Whenever possible, we encourage you to buy less, opt for reusable over single use, sharing economy so that we don't each have to own something, we can borrow from each other. Buy secondhand, local, ethical, and sustainable products, and of course, recycle whenever possible. Our energy is also a contributor to the climate crisis. We're burning fossil fuels at very rapid rates, and we are changing the climate dramatically as a result. Reducing personal energy consumption at home is a good solution. And we also have to think about policy changes. How can we make sure that our spaces are more eco-friendly? One example is through our use of space outside. This is an example of parking lots in Miami, Florida versus Atlanta, Georgia. And you can see that Atlanta has solar panels on top, which generates electricity as well as protects the cars underneath. Using the power of your future, we need candidates that understand the climate crisis that we're in and the urgency for action. So we encourage you to get involved with the issues in your community, as well as consider running for office as a career. And as we start to close, we do want to offer you the opportunity to partner with Clio. So Clio has a climate resilient schools program where we give climate presentations throughout different levels of schooling. We also have a teachers network where we provide resources to prepare teachers to incorporate climate into their curricula, regardless of the subject that they teach. We have climate lesson plans aligned to the Florida state standards. And we have a climate leadership information program. This was created by a student within the Clio network who was inspired by Clio presentations and wanted to bring more climate literacy into classrooms. So enrollment is open for autumn. You can email Gabriela@clio.org if you're interested in finding out more information, whether you're a student or a teacher. And that concludes my presentation. I'm going to pass it back over to Gabriela, who's going to introduce our next speaker. Thank you so much for your time, and feel free to put any questions into the chat.
Thank you so much, Julieta, for that wonderful presentation. I hope that all of you learned something new, learned something impactful and something meaningful to you in your lives as it relates back to climate change. So now that that's done, I'd like to welcome a very special guest. Her name is Gianna, and she is the CLIP coordinator at Miami Palmetto Senior High School, where she does a plethora of things, but one of the many things she does is she helps to run our CLIP program at her high school. So she's going to tell you a little bit about the incredible things that she does for climate education and action with Clio. And with that said, take it away, Gianna.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Gianna Hutton. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a junior at Miami Palmetto Senior High School, a CLIP coordinator, as well as a local climate justice organizer. So I've always loved animals. I've always loved the environment. Growing up here in Miami, we live in an area that's known for its beautiful beaches and clear skies, but also our beautiful pine rocklands and wetlands. So I never really understood the urgency of the climate crisis or why it even mattered until I was in 10th grade in AP Environmental Science. And that's where I learned the relevance this issue has to Miami. So we're ground zero when it comes to the climate crisis. And we're already seeing the effects today, from the elevated temperatures in Biscayne Bay prompting the massive fish kill we saw this summer to, as you heard in the presentation, Hurricane Michael's intensified hit in 2018 due to the coast being just 5 degrees warmer. So at my school, only 3% of students take AP Environmental Science. So that's around 100 students out of 2,200. So that means that only 3% of my school had the background to connect the dots of what's happening in our home. I wanted to take action, and I was at a club meeting, and I met another student from Gen Clio who eventually went on to found CLIP. And she stood up and started talking about the climate crisis with such an intense passion that I never imagined I could do that. But through Clio, I found my voice and CLIP, and it's been an incredibly valuable tool that empowers students like me to take action to protect my future. And for students and teachers on the call, I highly recommend becoming engaged to help equip the next generation with the tool of knowledge so they can be an informed citizen that can take action when needed and feel comfortable about talking about these issues they're really passionate about. So now I'd like to lead us into our next activity. In CLIP, we hold conversations about the climate crisis among our peers because climate conversations are key solutions to the crisis. Right now, we're going to do exactly what we do in CLIP, start climate conversations. Thanks for listening, and I'll pass it on to the Clio team.
Thank you so much, Gianna. That was great. So next slide. Now it's time to do exactly what Gianna said. We're going to start some climate conversations. But before we do that, did you all know that 72% of Americans believe global warming is happening, but only 35% actually discuss global warming at least occasionally? That's a problem because we need public education and public will for us to act effectively on this issue at various different scales, from the local level to the state level to the federal level. And this is why we must start climate conversations with our loved ones, especially because those are the people who already trust us and will be open to learning more about the climate crisis from us. So let's do it. Next slide. Let's start some climate conversations. I want to ask you all, what was the most meaningful thing that you learned today during our climate presentation? Go ahead and drop it in the chat. So that could be, for example, that the last 5 years have been the hottest on record, or that Miami-Dade County is extremely vulnerable to something called saltwater intrusion. Let us know in the chat, what was the most meaningful thing that you learned during our presentation today? So I'm saying global warming isn't talked about enough. The amount of carbon in the atmosphere and heat, I'm going to assume extreme heat rising. The danger days that will be over 105 degrees Fahrenheit, yeah. Sea level rise predictions, the displacement of people, how dangerously at risk Florida is, These are all great things, definitely. And when we learn things like that, it's important for us to pass that information on to other people to start these conversations. So Huli, could you hit the next slide? Yeah, awesome. So now that you guys have said these things, I want you to actually text that thing, that statement that was so meaningful to you that you learned. I want you to take out your devices, take out your phones, and text somebody that you love this thing that you learned, like your mom or your best friend or your dad or your cousin. You know, hey mom, I learned that Florida is actually extremely vulnerable to something called sea level rise. So go ahead and take these next like 10, 15 seconds to go ahead and text that statement, a fact that you learned today, to somebody that you love. By the way, this activity will be rewarded by a prize, so make sure you're paying attention. We are giving out a prize for the first person who completes this activity. Okay, so seeing a lot more statements in the chat. Yeah, a prize. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys just a few more seconds to go ahead and send that text. Whoever is the first person to complete this activity is eligible for a prize. Okay, so now I want you to put in the chat, who was the person that you texted? Was it your mom? Was it your dad? Was it your cousin or your best friend or a neighbor? Let us know in the chat right now who you texted. Ooh, I see somebody texted a family group chat. That's great. Getting a bunch of people in one go. My best friend, my partner, a friend, mom, all these different, cool. Lots of moms. That's good. Your mom should probably be one of the first loved ones that come to your mind. Dog, not sure how you texted your dog, but I'm glad you hold them close to your heart. Okay, so this is great. All right, now this is the important part. Huli, can you hit the next slide? Okay, so now that you sent that text, I want you all to take a screenshot of that text conversation. So go on your phone, take a screenshot of that text conversation you have with your mom, your dad, your dog, your family group chat. And this is the important part, because whoever does this next step first is going to win a $20 gift card to wherever you want. So, Huli, can you hit the next slide? This is what we want you all to do. Take that screenshot that you took and right now post it to Twitter or Instagram and tag the Clio Institute and use the hashtag Clio Institute. If you don't have social media, that's totally fine. You can go ahead and email it right now to julieta@clioinstitute.org. So again, take a screenshot of that text conversation you started with a loved one, post it to Twitter, Instagram, tag Clio. If you don't tag us, we won't see it. Use the hashtag. And if you don't have social media, go ahead and email it to julieta@clioinstitute.org. So again, whoever's the first person to do this, we will reach out to you and we will give you a special prize, $20 gift card to wherever you'd like. Okay, so why are we even doing this? Because after you post it in the next few minutes, or ideally in the next hour, you're going to get a reply from us at Clio with a resource. And that resource will help you continue the conversation that you started with this person, your mom, your dad, your family group chat, your best friend. It's going to have a list of questions related to climate change that you can ask them to begin stirring these conversations at your home. All right, we got a winner. I just got a message. We have a winner. Not sure who the winner is, but we will definitely make sure to reach out to you, and we'll definitely make sure to get your information to give you that gift card. And again, we are replying to all of you with a resource. So make sure you use that resource. It's really helpful. And the whole point of this activity is we want you all to actually continue this conversation with your loved one and drive those conversations. Okay, I just got told who the winner is. It's Jeremiah Estonville. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. You are our winner. So we'll go ahead and make sure to reach out to you at the end of this webinar. So congratulations, Jeremiah. All right, well, thank you all for participating. I think we're ready to move on to the next portion of our event. Awesome job, guys. Okay, so right now we're actually just gonna take a quick 5-minute silent break. If you didn't complete the last activity, feel free to still do it. We wanna see your text conversations. We wanna see your activity on social media. So we're gonna take a 5-minute break now. We will come back at 1:48. So if you all need to use the bathroom, drink some water, mental break, now is the time. We'll start again at 1:48. All right, everybody. We will get started in about 15-30 seconds. Okay, Huli, could you bring us to our next slide, please? Welcome back, everybody. So, to build upon this theme of climate justice today, we are actually going to take a few moments now, or a few minutes, I should say, to listen to an episode of a podcast called House on Fire. And this is actually a podcast that I co-host with my good friend JP, with the support of the Clio Institute. And a year ago now, we did an episode with a leading Black activist named Leah Thomas. She's a leading Black activist in the environmental justice movement. And we talked to her about the intersection of climate change and racial justice. So today we're all going to listen to Leah explain how climate change unfairly impacts Black lives and the story that made her realize that climate change was intertwined with racial justice. And as we listen to this, I want you all to think of your own possible experiences with social injustice, with climate injustice, how maybe you feel that the climate crisis may be impacting your life or somebody you know unfairly, whether it's related back to the environment or your housing or your anything, right? So with that said, Julieta, when you're ready, feel free to start the audio.
So tragic what we're seeing. This isn't fun. This isn't something that we want to do.
It's not trendy.
It's not trendy. It's not a fad. So that's something we definitely want to get into. But to begin, we just want to learn a little bit more about you. So I actually saw an interview where you spoke about how the murder of Michael Brown in Missouri sparked a change in you and your view on environmentalism. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Definitely. I've always kind of been in predominantly white spaces. I went to a private school where I had to kind of drive 30 minutes away, or my parents did because I was a child, so I couldn't drive, but we had to go 30 minutes away to this very affluent private school when I was from a suburb and my parents were more middle class, and I was always in predominantly white spaces. And I kind of hid from my Black identity. I didn't want it to be something that was really a big part of my life because I just wanted so badly to blend in. And then I went to college in a similar environment at Chapman University in Orange County, predominantly white space, very similar to my private school, and I tried my very best to kind of hide from my identity. And I feel bad for the younger version of myself for feeling like I needed to do that, but in many ways it felt like a protective measure that I was doing. And then I couldn't hide from it anymore. I went home for summer break back to St. Louis, and that was when, unfortunately, there was the murder of Michael Brown, who was just a couple circles of friends away from the people that I knew in my neighborhood. And it was just so traumatizing, the entire aftermath of it. Firstly, his death, the way that it was done excessively, and also his body laying in the street for so long. And I was shocked by the blatant disregard of Black life in that moment. And then I had to go back to school, and I changed my major to environmental science and policy. And while I was in my classes, I was distracted. And how could I not be? When I turned on the TV, I remember there was one time I was getting my hair braided and we were watching CNN, and then I saw my parents in a protest while I was getting my hair done, and I couldn't look away from it. And I had this just eye-opening experience during my environmental science classes when I was also learning about how Black and Brown communities are exposed to poor air quality and water quality at higher rates. And all of this just seemed interconnected, and I wanted to get a better understanding of how I could make the world a better place so there wouldn't be another Michael Brown. And unfortunately, through so much heartbreak, there have been so many more. So in 2020, I couldn't do it anymore as an environmentalist. I couldn't walk beside my non-Black environmentalists at climate protests and do it without knowing that they would also support my life, because I was marching for salmon. I was marching for polar bears. I was marching for other endangered species, but then to have my community not show that same support for me and my life, I knew something needed to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And you go back to like, and I'm sitting here in awe because I'm hearing everything that you're describing with vivid imagery. And one of the things that I've appreciated in the past few weeks going to these actions myself and showing up for Black Lives is that I've seen so many of the people who I organize for climate with there. And it just really brings me a sense of hope as to, oh my God, yes, these people get it. These people actually get it. And as we're like going across Miami, lots of the chants that we hear are very powerful. And one of them is, I can't breathe. A line that refers to the words uttered by George Floyd and countless other victims of police murders. And in another interview that I saw with you, you have an interesting take on this line of I can't breathe and how it connects to environmental racism. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I found this kind of triple meaning because when I was thinking of those words, I was also thinking about how so many Black and Brown communities across the nation and across the world are exposed to higher rates of particulate matter. So essentially poor air quality, which can cause respiratory illnesses and higher asthma rates and other illnesses. So I was thinking it's not fair that there are people in this country that during a pandemic, firstly, that has corona that attacks the respiratory system. So that's one thing. And then also they're exposed to poor air quality at higher rates, so they can't breathe in that regard properly like everyone else. And then to have to deal with police brutality and unlawful killings and literally not be able to breathe and say that as their last words before death. There's these three things that are happening right now that all just feel so unjust. I know corona is none of our fault, but these other two things are, and these are two things that we can change, and we need to allow people the right to breathe, and not only breathe but thrive in an ecosystem that is healthy and safe. Because there's so many other issues when you think about crime and education, inequality and things like that. The base is being able to drink clean water, breathe clean air, and if those two things aren't there, how can anyone really have a chance?
Right. Definitely. And that's what you just spoke about right there is like the perfect example of how important it is to talk about race when we talk about climate and the environment. And with that.
Alrighty. I hope that you all enjoyed listening to that and you gathered something important when it comes to the intersection of climate change and race, and you understood a little bit better how some people are disproportionately impacted by this crisis. Huli, you can hit the next slide. I also just want to add that I really resonate with Leah's ending is being the base for human life and equity is really being able to drink clean water and breathe clean air. And she says, if we don't have those things, how can anyone really have a chance? And I think it's important for us to recognize as communities that everybody should have the right to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And so today we're going to focus, we have been focusing on the intersection of climate change and social justice. And as you saw in our presentation, climate change doesn't affect everyone equally. We're seeing that those in under-resourced communities, which are oftentimes Black, Latinx, and Indigenous folks, are disproportionately impacted by the threats of climate change like sea level rise and extreme heat. And this includes a lack of protection in the face of natural disasters too, and a greater exposure to different climatic threats. And this intersection is honestly just one of the many reasons why we have to tackle the climate crisis and demand for action from our governments. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take climate action in these next 20 minutes or so. And before we do so and we jump into our next activity, I want to gauge the audience a little bit. I'm wondering how many of you have contacted your elected officials before? So let's take a quick poll. Huli, you can go ahead and launch the poll. So we're asking you, have you ever contacted an elected official before? Either yes or no. And if you are a teacher and you're answering for your physical classroom, feel free to gauge the classroom and see what the majority answer is. And so we're asking you if you've ever contacted an elected official before. I see some answers coming in. For the most part, the answer is no. I see Renee says that her classroom says no, that you all have not contacted an elected official before. You see more answers coming in. Feel free to keep bringing them in. For the most part, it's a no, but what we're gonna do today is we're going to change that. All right, I'm gonna give about like 10 more seconds, 10 more seconds for anybody else who hasn't answered, if you have ever contacted an elected official before. All right, I'm seeing that the poll is plateauing, so I'm gonna end the poll. And so the majority, 82% of you, have not contacted an elected official before. And so we are going to solve that today. We're all going to take the next few moments to do just that. So before I jump into it, next slide, Huli. We at Clio use something called an action alert, and it's a quick and effective way for us to voice our concerns to our elected officials. And today we're going to use an action alert tool, this tool, to contact our elected officials and ask them to pass a climate emergency declaration for their county. So what is a climate emergency declaration? If you don't know, it's basically a commitment that a city or a county or country really can make to promise that they will take action on the climate crisis and to ensure that their community switches to clean and renewable energy. And so just to give you a quick story, my activism actually started when I helped pass a climate emergency declaration for the city of Miami. This was about almost 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago now. I went to a local government meeting and I spoke about the reasons that I cared about climate change as a young person in Miami, Florida. And I spoke about how I felt that climate change is going to impact my future and the people that I love and the places that I love here in Miami. And after I spoke and after a bunch of my friends spoke, the elected officials that were sitting in that room listening to us, who represent my city, they decided to pass a climate emergency declaration. It was on the agenda, and when we spoke, it really helped push them to pass that item and to get a climate emergency declaration passed for the city of Miami. And in that moment, when the gavel was struck and when those elected officials said, yes, we are going to do this, I learned that using my voice actually works. And I learned that activism actually works. And so Clio has gotten climate emergency declarations passed in local governments around Miami, but we really want to get entire counties in our state to do it too. So I'm talking about Miami-Dade County, Broward County, Leon County, Orange County, Palm Beach County. They all need to pass climate emergency declarations and commit to taking action. So how are we going to do this? This is the important part where I give you the instructions and then we will get started. So we're basically going to use our voices via this action alert tool. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to open the link in the chat. And that link, which Julieta, if you can drop it in now, that would be great. It's the bit.ly link. You're going to open that link in the chat on your phone or your computer or however you can access it from however you're joining us today. And when you open that link, you're going to choose your county at the top from the green tabs. And so you see Broward County, Collier County, Leon County, Miami-Dade County. The first thing you're going to do after you open that link is make sure you choose the right county that you live in so that we make sure that this message you send actually goes to the elected officials representing your county. And something I want to note is that for our Tampa folks, Hillsborough County is not listed here, and this is because the email addresses of your elected officials are not on public record, but you can still participate in our activity. You can go to this link, you can get the message below, and you can still send this message individually to the email addresses of those who represent your county. You can just go online and Google county name, county mayor, and find a form to submit this message. And this also goes for anybody who's not in Florida, because climate emergency declarations can be passed anywhere in the world. So if you're joining from outside of Florida, this is something that you can still participate in via your own email system. So I see that Huli has dropped it in the chat. Yes, the link to this activity is bit.ly/Clio Earth Day. Please note that capitalization is important. If you do not type it exactly as it is in the chat or copy and paste it, it won't take you to the right page. So first thing you do, like I said, is you choose the county. Next slide, Huli. And then after that, after you choose your county, you're going to scroll down and you're going to take a few seconds to fill out the information here. So your first name, your last name, your email address, your home address, and the state that you live in. And then as you scroll down, you'll see that we have already set up your elected officials that where your message will go to. So after you fill out that personal information, you're going to go ahead and actually do the bulk of this activity, the real part of this activity, which is to fill out our pre-written message. So we already wrote a pre-written message for you all, where we help you ask your elected officials to support a climate emergency declaration. But there are parts of this message that are blank and that are in brackets because they are parts for you to fill out. And you have to make sure you fill out these brackets, because if you send this message without doing so, it's not going to work. And the elected official is going to read this message and think, what did this person really have to say? So what you need to do is fill in the parts of the message that are in the blanks and in the brackets. You're going to personalize this message with anything that you learned today that really was meaningful to you, and importantly, with your climate story. So think about your connection to climate change and the experiences that you've seen in your community. Maybe it's flooding in your street, or maybe it's extreme heat causing health problems for people that you know. And so once you're done writing this message and filling in those blanks, you are going to hit that big blue button that says add your voice. The second you hit that button, it gets sent directly to your county's elected officials. So they are going to receive this message in their inboxes, and they're going to receive a message from you that says, hey, this is why I care about climate change, and this is why I really think that you should pass a climate emergency declaration for our county. And so that's pretty much how the activity goes. Before we give you all your own time to work on it, I just want to stress that there are a ton of people on this call. So I know if that we all take part in doing this activity right now, we can make a big impact and flood the inboxes of our elected officials and really catch their attention. So we're going to spend about the next 10 minutes or so doing this activity. We're going to end at 2:15. If you have any questions at all throughout doing this activity, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're still going to be here and we'll be able to answer them for our students. All right, so with that said, I want to jump into now and spend the next 3 minutes just going to let you know really quickly how you can continue taking action and learning with us here at Clio. And first things first, we've got a lot of free virtual events happening at Clio all the time. You can view all of our upcoming events by actually taking your camera on your phone and scanning the QR code on your screen. You can go ahead and scan this QR code to get to our events page, or you could also go to clioinstitute.org/events. All right, next slide. So today was our second day of this 3-day webinar series. And if you enjoyed today, I invite you to join us for tomorrow's event, our final day, which is going to be focused on civic engagement. So very similar to the action alert that we just did, but we're going to do a deeper dive into how we engage with our communities and demand for action. You can register for this activity. If you can register for this event, if you haven't already, at bit.ly/earth2021. But if you're already registered for this one, you're registered for tomorrow, so you should have it on your calendar or have the link. So we hope to see you there. Next slide. We also have a webinar coming up that's specifically focused on climate change and biodiversity. So if this is a topic that you're really interested in, you can join us on April 29th at 5:30 p.m. We're going to be discussing how our biodiversity is impacted by climate change and how we can protect it, and in general, how we can live in a better balance with nature. So this event can also be found on our events page, clioinstitute.org/event, and you will find it on April 29th. All right, next slide. I would also like to take a second to invite you all to a few of our programs. So I help manage a program called CLIP, which is known as the Climate Leadership's Information Program. And it's where high school students in Florida become certified climate speakers to teach their peers about climate change and increase their awareness on campus through different activities. So if you're interested in this program, please email me at gabriella@clioinstitute.org. Enrollment is open for the next school year, and we'd love to work with you. Next slide. Also, in CLIP, We are currently having our CLIP students run Earth Day campaigns on social media. So as we speak, students are posting things, sharing information about climate change from different topics, from fast fashion to sea level rise. And so we would love if you can go ahead and support their Earth Day campaigns, and you can do so by going on Instagram and following us at CLIP Clio, where we are amplifying all of our students' campaigns, and you can go ahead, find them, like them, share them, and just show our CLIP students some love and support for their incredible work. All right, next slide. And I'll speed it up a little bit because I noticed I'm running out of time. So much like the presentation that Julieta gave you today, we also give climate presentations to our classrooms virtually for now. And through these presentations, we teach students from middle school to high school about the science, impacts, and solutions to climate change. So if you are a teacher or a student and you want to bring us to your school, please email me again at gabriella@clioinstitute.org. Next slide. We also have a youth advocacy program called Gen Clio, and this is basically a program where students of all ages can adopt and apply advocacy skills to increase their civic engagement in their communities and contribute to climate policy in those communities across Florida. And we'd love for you to join our next meeting in May. You can hit the next slide, Juli. Our next Gen Clio meeting is taking place on May 5th at 4 p.m. You don't have to come with any knowledge in advocacy or civic engagement. We'd be happy to have you. And you can register by scanning the QR code on your screen, or again, you can go to clioinstitute.org/events, and you will find the meeting on May 5th. Next slide. And lastly, we've got our Climate Speakers Network program happening now, where you can become a certified Clio climate speaker. And this is basically an online certification program that builds your confidence in talking about climate change, where we help you break down the science, impacts, and solutions to this issue. Enrollment is now open for the next cohort, so you can register to be a part of this next cohort by scanning the QR code on your screen, or going to, again, our website, clioinstitute.org, and hitting the tab for our Climate Speakers Network. All right, next slide. And that's about it. On behalf of myself, Julieta, and the entire team here at Clio, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It was a pleasure to teach you more about climate change, and we hope that you learned something valuable and you feel much more empowered to join our movement. So if you plan on joining us tomorrow, I look forward to seeing you. And with that said, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so, so, so much. I hope to see you all tomorrow. Bye. Thank you.